Hey everybody, we are on day 111 in our Bible reading plan, Joshua 13 through 15 and Psalm 111. And how are you enjoying the book of Joshua? We still got a few more days in it, but remember that this is a book about God's faithfulness through his power. In fact, the beginning of chapter 13 reminds us of that. The Lord is speaking to Joshua and he tells him some facts. He's old, he's not getting any younger, but he lays the land before him, and all of the land that the people of Israel conquered, remember, it was God's gift to them. It wasn't like they were like, oh, we want this piece of land. And I think a lot of this Old Testament material has so much implication to what's happening in the Middle East today. And I think sometimes there's a tension to believe that, but it's fact. I mean, God has made promises to his people and he remains faithful to his word. In fact, look at verse 6, I think is a really powerful reminder of what God says to Joshua. He says, I myself will drive them out from before the people of Israel, only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance. And we have to accept what God, his will is. And sometimes it's hard for some people to receive it, but it is indeed there to highlight again the glory of who God is, fighting on behalf of his people, faithful to his people, and should encourage us today as we are following the Lord and all that he's promised to us. One of the things, yesterday we saw how the people of Israel were destroying every person in the land and following God's command in that. Well, one of the things that would become a snare to them is that they didn't do this faithfully. In fact, the people of Israel were very faithless throughout time. But you see in chapter 13, verse 13, yet the people of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Makashites, but Geshur and Makath dwell in the midst of Israel to this day. And we see that again later on in the reading. And I think at the end of chapter 15, again, we see it. And this would become a problem for the people of Israel in many ways that we'll continue to explore as we make our way through the Bible together in our Bible reading plan. I think the highlight for me and where I want to spend the next minute is Caleb. Caleb is worth spending the time meditating on his life and his example. Caleb had been one of the two spies back in Numbers who had faith at Kadesh Barnea, and God had made him certain promises, and now he's claiming the promises. And in fact, the big idea today is this: a faith that is bold enough to ask for what God has already promised will experience the blessing that those who don't ask might otherwise not possess. I'm gonna write that down in the caption, but you need to meditate on this, because I think sometimes there's a tension between, God has promised us certain things, but he also wants us to ask. And Caleb, had he not approached Joshua and says, hey, here's what God has promised me, I want to claim that promise, he might never have gotten the land. We don't know. And I think it's important to reflect on that and to think about our lives. And so often we're like, why should I ask if God already knows what I need? Because he wants you to ask, because it is a sign of dependence and humility and faith to believe that God is good and that he will do what he has promised. And so Caleb receives what was promised, but he does ask first. And then his daughter has been watching, and I love her story because she's watched her dad, and she's like, yeah, he asks and he receives what's been promised. And at the end of chapter 15 or midway through, she comes to him. Of course, there's a story where he gives the husband who fights for her, but then she comes to her dad in verses 18 through 20, and Caleb says, what do you want? She says, give me a blessing since you have given me the land. Give me also springs of water. And I want to be that kind of Christian that asks for more from God because he is faithful and he's a good, good father. So what are you asking God? Are you afraid to ask, or are you leaning into the promises of God and seeing how he is a God who is faithful to his promises? Why don't we do that today? All right, guys. Love you guys. Catch you tomorrow.